Hello again. Right, this one is the review of my Canon 80D that I promised I would do for you. So as I said in the last video, I think I've had this camera for 5 or 6 years now. As you can see, it's got a battery grip fitted. I did it for two reasons really. The obvious one is more battery life when I'm out, and the other one is I use predominantly a 60 to 600mm sports lens, which is quite heavy, and the grip gives more balance for both horizontal and vertical portrait shooting. And I just find that the grip's much easier, plus you've got the added bonus of obviously a shutter button here as opposed to trying to reach over to here when you're shooting vertically. So that's the reason I use a battery grip. But it's not just for the extra battery life, it's also to balance out the camera body and to give me a more natural trigger position for, and to also reposition my focus points and things as well, which I can do on the back of that grip. So basically, yes, it's a Canon 80D, a 24.2 megapixel sensor on an APSC crop sensor, so a 1.6 crop factor. That has its advantages and disadvantages, to be honest. Yes, it's good for the extra reach, but to be honest, I find by the time you've cropped out to the, crop back into the distance that you need to frame your image or whatever, you've lost a lot of the detail anyway. So it's kind of a catch-22, like a no-win situation really for me. I prefer to shoot in manual and auto ISO, and just adjust the shutter speed accordingly for what light I've got available, obviously depending on how fast the subjects move that I'm shooting. If they're extremely fast moving subjects, then obviously I know I need to run a high shutter speed and have plenty of light basically, because my lens at the long end is 6.3. Anyway, this is about the camera. So I think I bought it in back end of 2017, maybe in early 2018. It served me very well. It's on about 57,000 on shutter count now, which I'm quite surprised with. I thought it'd be a lot higher than that. Last time I had it serviced and checked, it came back at 57,300, and I've not used it an awful lot since, to be honest. So I'll talk about the good things about it first, that I think are the good things about it. And number one has got to be the flip out screen that's on it, that gives you that full 180 degrees rotation, and you can see yourself if you're doing a vlog, and also if you're shooting low down to the ground, you can get that angled right down to the ground and still see in your screen at what you're shooting at when you're low down to the ground. So that's a really good bonus for me, something I use quite a lot. The autofocus itself on the camera is very, very twitchy, I find. You really need to know how to set it up. It can be a very fine parameter between getting 80% keepers and 20% keepers if you get it slightly wrong. But it seems to be very, very sensitive. I watched a guy on YouTube called Grant Atkinson, and I basically mirrored the settings that he used. He's a safari operator, so he does obviously wildlife stuff. Obviously he's shooting much bigger animals and mammals that we see in the UK, but he's aiming for the same thing that we are, a decent sharp image on the animal's eye or the head, and naturally the human eye is drawn to the animal eye when you look at that sort of photography. So I tend to set it on AI servo, which is continuous focus, AFC on other cameras. I use a single spot most of the time. This hasn't got the 4 little helpers that some of the Canon cameras have, like a single spot in the middle and 4 little helpers that you can move around the frame. This, you don't get that option with this. You get 1 spot, you get 9 spots, I think you get 16 or 17 spot, and you get the full 45 frame autofocus, which I found for wildlife is no good at all. It just focuses on, basically the way the focus systems work on every camera is on contrast. So just because you're pointing at the eye of a kingfisher sat on a riverbank, the camera doesn't necessarily know that's what you want to focus on. So it'll focus on the difference in contrast. And the autofocus on, if you leave your camera on auto basically and set 45-point autofocus and let the camera do its thing, they'll all be overexposed and they won't be anything like what you expect them to be, and you really need to learn how to master the autofocus system on it. So I'm going to push the Q button on this camera now and show you what I've actually got. Granted, there's not a lens on here, so it won't give you any lens settings, but if I push my Q button and turn it round, hopefully you can see what I've got there. I don't know if it's going to come into focus or not, and it's gone off, so we need to push the button again. But basically down here is your autofocus settings, and I'll read them out to you because it's probably going to be easier. I'm basically set on high speed continuous, evaluative metering and single spot autofocus in AI servo. And if I then go into the menu and go into the autofocus menu, which is right near the end on this one, right there it is, autofocus. So you can adjust the sensitivity of the tracking in your autofocus, so you've got locked on, responsive, and you can go 2 stops either way. I've left that one in the middle, so it's basically, what that means is how long the camera will give you to gain focus and let you fire the trigger, but the shutter basically. So I leave mine on equal priority for that one, so that, you know, hopefully the first frame I get is in shot, and then any continuous bursts after that are also in focus, as long as I've managed to keep my focus point on my subject, obviously. Number 2 in the autofocus menu is the acceleration and deceleration tracking. Now I leave that on 0. That goes to a +1 or a +2, and if you push the button on that and it tells you the difference are, if I press the info button, it tells you, it changes the subject response to the subject's acceleration or deceleration or sudden stopping. So with 0, which is where I've got mine set, stable focus can be achieved for the subjects that do not suddenly move, accelerate or decelerate. +1, +2 are suitable for subjects that move, suddenly accelerate, decelerate or stop. The higher the value, the more closely erratic subjects are tracked. Note that focus may be insistent because subjects that move at a relatively constant speed. Now I photograph a lot of owls and things like that, and they're not particularly fast moving animals, so I've found that mine, for my purposes, works best left on 0. I do sometimes jump it up to +1. So I'm going to set that on +1 now and just let you know the difference in another video, maybe how that come out. So the next one is AF auto point switching. So that is how long the focus point that you're using, if you're using more than one spot. This is obviously, if you're using more than one spot autofocus, it's how long it stays on your subject after it's lost slight focus on the subject before it hands over to the next focus point basically. And I've given mine a value of 0 again, because I use single spot thing all the time, most of the time, so it doesn't really matter to me. Then you can choose the priority between release and focus. So I set my first image priority on release because I want to get the first frame away. Hopefully I've managed to half press the shutter or back button focus and lock the focus on the first frame, press the and it will let me get the shutter fired away straight away. You can adjust that to go to focus. Obviously that then gives the camera longer to focus and longer time before it will actually fire the shutter. So I leave that set as release. The second, not quite sure what happened there, the camera decided to stop itself. So anyway, hopefully you're back with me now. So yes, the second image priority you can also adjust for speed or focus priority or equal priority. Now the first one I have on release because I want to get that first frame away. The second one I leave on equal priority because hopefully I've locked that focus and I'm just going to get a burst of shots as I pan across the frame and get that, track that animal, bird, whatever it is I'm tracking. So I leave that on equal priority. The next parameter in is assist beam firing. I disable it. I don't want any beams or any red lights or anything going off on my camera, so that's all disabled. Lens drive when autofocus is impossible. So that basically means if you're in really low light and it can't get any autofocus, it just won't fire up. I'll just leave mine on continue to search for focus, because you might be shooting something that's got white on it, all of a sudden it managed to pick it up in low light. Your next one is your AF selection points area. Now I've only got the single spot and the large group enabled. I don't use the 9 spot and I don't use the 45 spot because I find that they're just so inaccurate. They're not for me, you know. Maybe for landscapes and things like that where you want everything in the frame in focus, from your foreground to your actual subject matter in the middle and your sky or your sea or whatever's at the background. And I fully get why that might be there, but for me it doesn't work as a wildlife photographer. The other areas on the autofocus is basically how you select your AF point. So you can use the dial on the top, you can use the little touch pad on the back, and you can even use little up and down arrows, in left and right arrows inside the wheel on the back as well. So I tend to use the dial on the top and the up and down on the dial on the back. And then the orientation linked AF point, I have mine the same for horizontal and vertical. So if I turn my camera, the focus point stays where I left it basically. It doesn't jump to the edge of the frame or reset to the center of the frame. If I've got it 2/3 of the way up on the left hand side, I turn my frame around that way, it's in the same position, and I know I've got to move it if I want to recompose the image. The next one in there is how you autofocus the initial AF point selected in AI Servo AF. So basically that means you can set a certain AF point, whether it's the center one, the top left, the bottom right, you know, the 2 down from the center, wherever. You can set that to be your focus start point, and it'll always start from there. I do mine on manual, so again, wherever I've left my focus point from the last time I used my camera and turned it off, when I turn it back on, that focus point's going to be in the same place. Auto point color tracking, I've got that enabled. Continue autofocus AF point selection movement. It stops at the AF area edges. So basically when I get to the edge of my frame and I can't focus outside of, you know, you always get a little bit of the viewfinder that doesn't cover your sensor, and your AF doesn't work. There's no point scrolling, so mine doesn't scroll across and then start again the other side. If I get to the far right of the frame as I'm looking at it, it stops there, and if I want to go to the far left, I've got to go all the way back across to the far left. It won't go from the right to the first stop on the left, so I have to go all the way back. And in my autofocus, in my viewfinder, I like to see where my focus points are. Now some people don't like the little red grids and everything that you get in there, or the dark grey boxes showing you which is your active focus point. People don't like that, some people. I like to know where my focus point is. So I like to know that if I'm not where I want it to be, I can literally quickly move it using the dial or the up and down keypad. I can literally move it and get it where I want it, and then fire the trigger, or the shutter, sorry. And the next one is basically the viewfinder display illumination. That basically tells me that in the dark, or when the light levels are going, instead of it being a dark grey, like LCD type focusing arrangement in the viewfinder, they go to like a glowing red. They glow red in the dark or in low light, so that you can see them. And I have that illuminated because, as I said, I'm quite often out in the evenings or early mornings in low light shooting owls and things like that, and I want to see where my focus system is and where it's working. And then the last parameter on the autofocus of the 80D is it's got a facility in it where you can adjust, micro adjust the autofocus to suit your lens type. Now I've had to do this with my Sigma 60-600 lens. I found I was missing an awful lot of shots, and it was something again that I watched by watching a tutorial online where you can actually adjust the parameter of your lens. Now the easiest way to do this is to get a tape measure, angle it down towards the camera, so as you look at me it's that way, looking down towards you, pick a point on that tape measure that you can focus on easily, that's distinguishable from the other. So like, you know, maybe at 2 foot or 3 foot it's labelled 24 inches in red or yellow or whatever, it stands out on your tape measure. Pick a point there, go to the shortest end of your lens and focus on that and take a shot in good light with your camera on a tripod, stabilised, a decent shutter speed, plenty of light, and the correct exposure obviously, and make sure you get that focus nailed, and then zoom your lens out as far as it will go to the long end and take the same shot again on the same parameter on that tape measure, whether it was 24 or 36 inches, whatever it was, and then see where the actual clear focus mark is. Now if it's behind on the long end, which mine was, then you need to adjust the back end of the focus to bring that closer, so that when you're actually hitting the 36 mark is where your focus point is actually focusing. And if it's clearer in front of the mark, then you need to extend it, and it's as simple as that. It's basically what it is. You're basically calibrating the lens to the camera body, and so that the focus point is matching where it's showing on your focus point on your screen. Basically I was missing an awful lot, and I got really frustrated with it, thinking what is wrong with this lens and this camera body, you know. And I knew it wasn't all me, because I was resting on hedges and on you know, I don't use a tripod, but I made sure my camera was stabilised on a gate post or something like that, as good as a tripod. I was in good light, and I was still missing an awful lot of shots. You know, I'd maybe get the first shot in focus, and then the rest of them would be terrible. And it wasn't down to, you know, it wasn't down to body movement or not enough shutter speed or anything like that. It was just slightly soft images that I was never happy with. So I looked into that, and since I did that, my keeper rate went from probably 45-50% up to 85-90%. And any decent photographer will tell you that nobody comes home with 100% keepers. Not even with the latest mirrorless cameras and all the rest of it. You know, everyone cock shots up and whatever else, and there's always things that go wrong. So that's another little thing that the 80D can do. I'm sure a lot of other cameras can do as well, but this level of camera is capable of doing that. And I've done that with one of my big lenses. So other things about this camera. Shush, Maisie, that's the cat. If you can hear that horrible noise, that's one of our Siamese cats. Apologies about that. The other things that I... Shush, Maisie, stop it. Good gal. Good gal. The other things that I really do like about it are it's relatively lightweight for a, you know, it's not a professional level camera. It's more like an intermediate use camera. It's not an amateur level camera. It has got quite a clever system in it. It's got a very advanced autofocus system, as I just spoke about. And it is a very, very good enthusiast level camera, I would say, you know, semi-professional, that sort of thing. And even as a second body for a professional photographer, I'd still say it was a good choice for someone who wanted to go, you know, if they got a full frame camera as their main camera, and they wanted a good second body, I would say get one of these. You know, great camera. I've had it serviced 2 or 3 times in the 6 years I've owned it. It's never let me down. Battery life's been really good with it. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't always use genuine Canon batteries either, because they're bloody expensive. So I've bought some aftermarket brand new batteries, obviously and with little USB chargers, and they outlast and charge much quicker than the Canon genuine batteries do. So, and I've had no problems with using them. One of the big drawbacks of this camera is ISO performance. Now, it goes up to 25,600. They're awful. You can't get anywhere near using that kind of, you know, unless you're in total darkness and the background is completely black and it doesn't matter. Anything that's dusky, dawny, you know, with that sort of breaking light or fading light, and there's still a bit of light there, and you've got, you know, a subject in front of you, then I've capped mine at 3,200, and even then sometimes I reduce that down to 1,600. Maybe that's me being a bit over picky, but I have noticed that at 32,000, that's as far as I want to go with my images. I won't necessarily not put an image out because it's high ISO. You know, I'll edit it, raise the contrast levels and whatever, and maybe darken the picture a bit and sharpen it and whatever. But I'm not a huge fan of massive editing. I haven't got the experience of doing it. I don't really know how to do it, if I'm honest. And I do what you call very basic editing. You know, brightness, contrast, exposure. You know, I don't go into histograms and all that sort of thing. You know, I'll do just basic, you know, maybe a bit of saturation, a bit of highlights, a bit of black, you know, bring the blacks in or out, whichever way they need. But yeah, ISO performance on this is one of the drawbacks, I'm afraid. For me anyway, for what I do. Maybe for someone who's, you know, shooting in a studio with the correct lighting and everything else all the time, not an issue for them maybe. Or someone who's doing landscape photography, and you get a lot of out of focus or a lot of, you know, subject, you know, a lot of detail in a photograph. Maybe the ISO wouldn't be picked up, whereas my photography tends to have a lot of background in it. You know, I'm looking at a small subject with quite a lot of background showing habitat and that sort of thing. And in low light, the high ISO does notice to me. And, you know, good or bad, people will, oh, that's a noisy photo, that's not a very good photo just because it's noisy. But you think that going back 20 years to what we had then to what we got now, sometimes we're being a little bit too picky. But I have decided to cap the ISO to 3,200 most of the time. Like I say, if I know I'm out shooting, one of my friends does an urban fox. He's got an urban foxes that he feeds locally, and obviously they're lit up with LED lighting, but the background's completely black. So I've got no problem bumping my ISO up. You know, I've even gone up to 12,800 then, because the background is so dark you don't notice it. You know, your subject's lit, perfectly lit under LED lights. They're used to it, they're accustomed to it, it doesn't do them any harm. They'll come right up to your hand and take an egg or a chick off of you, straight out your hand. You know, they're not worried by it at all. And like I say, you can run, you know, 6,400, 10,000, you know, 12,800 ISO, no problem at all then. And yeah, that really is about it. So, you know, it's been a brilliant all-rounder for me. I will get round to changing it at some point, without a doubt, but I will keep it as a second body. It's been a, you know, a fantastic camera, not one that I'm looking to get rid of it by any means. And if you're looking for a very good, you know, enthusiast level, if you kind of know your way around a DSLR and you know the basics of photography, this would be a very good start for someone looking to get a decent first camera. So yeah, any questions or anything else that you want to know on that, please pop them in the box below, and I look forward to seeing them. Please give this video a like and a subscribe if you're not subscribed to it, and tell your friends, and I will see you on the next one.